KEYNOTE-598 was a randomized double-blind study which compared the treatment of patients with non-small cell lung cancer, both squamous and non-squamous, with PD-L1 tumor proportion scores of 50% or more and no activating mutations, and it compared treatment with pembrolizumab plus ipilimumab to treatment with pembrolizumab plus placebo. So it was really designed to look at what the impact of adding ipilimumab was to a standard treatment, the standard treatment being pembrolizumab. Pembrolizumab is a standard treatment for patients with both non-squamous and squamous non-small cell lung cancer and PD-L1 tumor proportion scores of 50% or more. That's based on the findings of the KEYNOTE-024 study, which showed that this was better than chemotherapy, and confirmed in the KEYNOTE-042 study, and in particular in the greater than 50% population in that study. So that's a standard treatment, and the real question arises, can you improve on that treatment by adding a second immune checkpoint inhibitor, in this case, an anti-CTLA-4 antibody, ipilimumab? So the study was carried out as a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. Patients to be eligible for the study had to have either squamous or non-squamous non-small cell lung cancer. They had to have a tumour proportion score, which was centrally tested, of 50% or more. They could not have an activating EGFR or ALK mutation or rearrangement, and they could not have uncontrolled brain metastases. So they were the patients that were enrolled in this study. They were randomized 1-to-1 to treatment with pembrolizumab at a standard dose of 200 milligrams every 3 weeks, or ipilimumab at a dose of 1 milligram per kilogram every 6 weeks. And they had a total of up to 2 years of treatment. So it's 35 doses of pembrolizumab and 18 of ipilimumab. The control arm was pembrolizumab in the same dose and saline placebo, given obviously the same way as the ipilimumab. The trial was stratified for ECOG performance status, the region, which was East Asia versus the rest of the world, and histology, squamous versus non-squamous. So the co-primary endpoints of the study were overall survival and progression-free survival assessed on blinded independent central radiology review. What we found was that there was no difference in either of those endpoints. So taking overall survival first, the median overall survival on the pembrolizumab ipilimumab arm was 21.4 months, whilst on the pembrolizumab placebo arm, it was 21.9 months. The hazard ratio was 1.08 with a non-significant p-value. Progression-free survival, very similar findings with no difference between the two treatment arms. The medians were 8.2 and 8.4 months in the ipilimumab and the placebo-containing arms respectively, and a hazard ratio of 1.06, and again, a non-significant p-value. So this really shows us in terms of efficacy, there's no difference between these two treatments. Similarly, if you looked at response rates, they're identical, and duration of response is almost identical between the two arms. We also looked in subgroups to see if there was a subgroup of patients who benefited either more or less, and we found that for the various different subgroups of patients, none of the results for those subgroups varied from the overall trial result. So pretty comprehensively, there is no difference in efficacy between these two treatments. The one area where we did find a difference between the two treatments was in the area of toxicity or adverse events. And in particular, what we found was that both for treatment-related adverse events and for immune-mediated adverse events, the adverse events, the toxicities, were higher for the ipilimumab-containing regimen, pembro ipilimumab, and that applied to all grade toxicities, grade 3 to 5 toxicity, so the high grade ones, serious adverse events leading to death, and adverse events leading to discontinuation. So it doesn't matter which way you cut it, there are more side effects associated with the combination of pembrolizumab and ipilimumab. The very specific ones where there was statistically a higher rate included rash, pneumonitis, elevated transaminases, and colitis. But also for many others, there were non-statistical elevations in the rate of side effects. So if we now say, well, what does that mean for treatment? Well, I think the first thing it means is that there's no justification for adding ipilimumab to pembrolizumab in the treatment of these patients as first-line treatment. It really confirms pembrolizumab monotherapy as a standard of care for that group of patients. If you then sort of ask the question, why did it not improve outcomes? Well, we know a few things. The first thing we know is that, in fact, it's not because the pembrolizumab sort of outperformed what we would expect. It behaved exactly as was expected. Also, it's not that we picked a particularly bad group of patients. The patient's survival is what you would expect for that group of patients. So I think it's more likely that if you choose patients who are already going to respond well to pembrolizumab, that you're selecting a group of patients who anti-CTLA-4 antibodies just doesn't help. And so I think that for now, pembrolizumab remains a standard of care for these patients. The trial had accrued completely. There was a planned interim analysis after 12 months after the final patient was accrued and after there'd been about 240, 250 events. And during that interim analysis, the External Data Monitoring Committee asked for non-binding futility criteria. And so we used the futility criteria that should have been applied at the second interim analysis. And the trial met those futility criteria. So it was actually unblinded at that point, and that's where these results come from. Now, it doesn't change the results, it doesn't change anything. It just means that it was already obvious after 12 months of follow-up from the last patient entering the trial that this trial was never going to show a difference.